The Forgotten Door Chapter 1, Room 1906, a hotel that shouldn't exist. The Holloway Hotel loomed against the night sky, a relic of another era. Its once majestic facade was now a decayed husk, windows dark, its neon sign flickering weakly as if struggling to stay alive. Daniel Carter hesitated before stepping through the grand entrance, the heavy wooden doors creaking open like the whisper of something forgotten. Inside, the lobby was too quiet. A massive chandelier hung overhead, its crystals covered in dust. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and something else, a faint, metallic scent that set his nerves on edge. At the front desk, the receptionist, a thin man with hollow cheeks and dead eyes that didn't quite blink enough, watched him approach. Daniel placed his hands on the counter. "I need a room. Room 1906. The man's smile faltered. The air shifted. "There's no room 1906, the man said, his voice flat, almost rehearsed. Daniel slid a $100 bill across the counter. "Check again." The man didn't even look at the money. His lips twitched unnaturally. "Sir, we do not have room 1906. Take room 1912. Daniel clenched his jaw. Something about this place felt off, but he nodded. "For now." A brass key, heavier than it should have been, was pushed across the counter. As Daniel picked it up, the receptionist leaned in and murmured, so quietly he almost missed it, "If you see a door that shouldn't be there, don't open it." Finding 1906, the 19th floor corridor stretched ahead, dimly lit by flickering sconces. Daniel walked past the rooms, counting under his breath. 1901. 1903. 1905. Then nothing. Where 1906 should have been, there was just wallpaper, no door, no seam, as if the room had never existed. But Daniel knew better. He ran his fingers along the wall. The texture shifted beneath his touch as if breathing. Then his fingertips found it, a slight indentation. A faint, metallic whisper filled the air like a lock clicking open on its own. The wallpaper peeled away. A door manifested before his eyes. Carved into the old wood, room 1906. Crossing the threshold, his instincts screamed at him to leave. Instead, he gripped the iron handle. The door swung open before he could even turn the knob. A wave of freezing air hit him like a wall. The room inside was pristine, too pristine. A Victorian-style bedroom untouched by dust, the bed neatly made as if expecting him. An old oil lamp flickered faintly, though no one had been there to light it. But what unsettled him most was the massive mirror covering the far wall. Unlike the rest of the room, it was perfect, its glass too smooth, too clear, reflecting the room with unnerving precision. Daniel took a slow step forward. The air felt thick, heavy, like something was pressing down on his lungs. He glanced at the mirror. His reflection stared back at him. And then it smiled. Daniel hadn't smiled. Something else was in the room, a deep, paralyzing cold spread through his limbs. His reflection stood motionless, except for its lips, curling into a grin that wasn't his. The lights flickered. The wallpaper behind him rippled, like something moving beneath it. Then a noise, soft at first, a faint scratching sound from inside the walls. It grew louder, closer. Daniel turned, his breath coming in short gasps. From the shadows of the room, a shape began to take form. It was human-like, but wrong. A figure emerging from the darkness itself, its body distorting unnaturally, joints bending at the wrong angles. Daniel stumbled backward. The figure stepped into the dim light, and his stomach dropped. It was him, his own face, but its eyes, they were black, hollow, a void, and it was still smiling. The door was gone. Daniel spun, bolting toward the exit. He clawed at the doorknob, locked. His own breath fogged in the freezing air. Behind him, the thing mimicked his every move, head tilting in unnatural jerks. Then it whispered, "You're not supposed to be here." The lights died. The walls groaned. The reflection stepped out of the mirror. "There's only one way out," Daniel's mind screamed. The writing on the wall, what did it say? There is only one way out. His eyes flicked toward the mirror. No, but there was no time. The thing behind him moved too fast, its arms stretching toward him. Daniel threw himself into the mirror. On the other side, he expected impact, glass shattering. Instead, he felt weightless, falling not down but inward. The room flipped, snapped back into place, and he landed hard. He gasped for air, looked around. Room 1906. But something was wrong. The furniture looked twisted, as if someone had tried to copy the original but got the details slightly off. The air tasted metallic. Daniel turned toward the mirror, and his heart stopped. His reflection was still there, but it wasn't moving. Instead, it was staring at him with an expression of pure triumph. Then it turned and walked away. Daniel lunged forward, slamming his fists against the glass. No, no! But the reflection was already gone. And when he turned toward the door, it was open. But something told him it didn't lead back to the real world. The final realization, Daniel stepped cautiously into the hallway. The lights were dimmer. The air was thicker. The walls were peeling, as if time had collapsed in on itself. He turned toward where room 1906 should have been. But there was no door, just a wall. His breath hitched. There was no room 1906, because he was inside it now. The other Daniel, his reflection, was out there now, in the real world, living his life. And Daniel? He was trapped, just like the ones before him, just like the whispers on the walls. And then, from somewhere deep within the darkened hallway, something else began to laugh. Fire to be continued. Chapter 2. The other side, a world that shouldn't exist. Daniel Carter stood frozen, his breath shallow. The hallway stretched ahead, eerily familiar yet unmistakably wrong. It was the same hotel corridor, yet it wasn't. The air was thick, almost pressurized, and every breath he took felt weighted, sluggish. The dim sconces cast long, flickering shadows that didn't match his movements. His hands curled into fists. This wasn't the real world. He turned sharply, expecting to see room 1906 behind him. But the door was gone. No frame, no markings, nothing but a smooth, unbroken wall. His pulse pounded against his ribs. He was trapped. Somewhere in the real world, his reflection, the other Daniel, was walking free. And he was stuck in a place that shouldn't exist. Signs of the impossible. Daniel forced himself to move. The hallway stretched endlessly. The carpet underfoot felt too soft, like he was walking on something organic. The numbered doors lined the corridor. 1901, 1903, 1905. He stopped at room 1912, the number he had originally been assigned when he checked in. His breath hitched. The door was slightly open. The sight sent a cold shiver down his spine. Had someone been waiting for him? Slowly, cautiously, he reached for the doorknob, turned too easily. The door creaked open. The room that was watching him, the room inside, was identical to the one he had originally been given in the real world. But it wasn't right. The furniture was placed the same way, but slightly off. The bed too long, the chair too narrow, the walls angled strangely. A single lamp glowed dimly on the nightstand. Daniel's breath caught. There was no bulb inside it. And then he saw the mirror. It stood against the far wall, just like the one in room 1906. But it didn't reflect him. Instead, it showed the hallway behind him. Daniel turned sharply. Nothing was there. He looked back at the mirror. And then, a shadow moved across the glass. Not his, something else. The whispering walls, a whisper, soft, fleeting, brushed against his ear. Daniel tensed. Then another, and another. A chorus of voices, layered, frantic, pleading. He turned sharply toward the walls. The wallpaper, it was moving. At first, it was subtle, a ripple. Then fingertips pressed through, a distorted hand, a face stretching against the fabric of reality. Mouths formed, opening in silent screams. The whispers turned desperate. Help us. He's watching. It's already too late. Daniel's stomach twisted. He took a step back, and a voice rasped from behind him. Turn around. Something else was there. Daniel's body locked in place. Every instinct screamed at him to run. Slowly, he turned. The door to the room was open again, but the hallway beyond had changed. The walls, they were pulsing, breathing, and at the far end, a figure stood watching him, tall, unmoving, featureless, yet he could feel its gaze. Then the lights began to die. One by one, the overhead sconces flickered out, starting from the far end, moving toward him. The whispers grew into screams. Daniel's breath hitched. The figure stepped forward. Another step. Another. The hallway collapsed into darkness. Then, a single whisper, right next to his ear. Run. The message on the mirror. Daniel stumbled back into the room, slamming the door shut. His pulse hammered. The air felt heavier. He turned, eyes landing on the mirror. Words had appeared on the glass, as if scrawled by an unseen hand. Find the exit before he finds you. A chill ran through him. Someone had been here before him. And beneath the warning, something else, a name. His name. The wrong door. Daniel's breath came in short gasps. There had to be a way out. The door he had just locked? No, the hallway was wrong. The window, a black void. Then he noticed it. The closet door. It was slightly open. Something was inside, watching him. The closet. Daniel stepped forward. His fingers twitched as he gripped the closet door. He hesitated. Then he pulled it open. Darkness. Empty. Then, a man sat in the farthest corner. Or something that used to be a man. His skin was too tight, his eyes sunken but wild. Then it smiled. Daniel's blood turned to ice. "You're not supposed to be here." It lunged. The exit that wasn't an exit. Daniel staggered back, his heart hammering. The thing crawled toward him on all fours, its movements unnatural, jerky, like a marionette pulled by unseen strings. The walls screamed. Daniel ran. He hit the mirror. Asterisk, asterisk, expecting impact. Asterisk, asterisk, but instead, the surface rippled. The world inverted, and he fell. Did he escape? When Daniel opened his eyes, he was back in the hotel. The hallway was normal, the lights steady, the air felt real. Had he escaped? His heart pounded as he sprinted toward the lobby. Then he froze. There was a man at the front desk. His back was turned. He was checking in. Daniel took a shaky step forward. The man's voice reached his ears. It was his own. Slowly, the man turned. Daniel's stomach dropped. It was him. Or at least something that looked exactly like him. And when Daniel looked at his own reflection in the lobby mirror, there was nothing there. The realization hit him like a freight train. He had never escaped. The one who left wasn't him. Chapter 3. The hotel that never lets you leave. Daniel stood frozen in the middle of the hotel lobby. Something was wrong. The room was exactly as it had been when he first arrived. The same warm lighting, the same polished marble floors, the same elegant front desk. Yet, a terrible sense of familiarity crawled up his spine like ice-cold fingers. A man was checking in at the front desk. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The man was him, not a resemblance, not someone similar. It was him. The same tousled brown hair, the same navy blue jacket, the same wary expression he had worn upon arriving. Daniel took an involuntary step backward, his eyes darting to the large mirror behind the front desk. There, in the reflection, was other Daniel. Daniel himself was missing. A sharp wave of nausea hit him. Then other Daniel turned and smiled. It was not his smile. It was stretched too wide, revealing too many teeth. Daniel took another step back, but his foot did not make a sound. The air around him felt too thick, too still. He turned to the other guests, the hotel staff. Surely someone else saw this. Nobody reacted. The receptionist continued typing into her computer. A bellboy pushed a luggage cart past him. A woman in a red dress crossed the lobby, laughing into her phone. None of them looked at him. Daniel's breath hitched. He opened his mouth to speak, to scream, but no sound came out. A whisper curled against his ear, low and breathy. "No one sees you anymore, Daniel." He spun around. No one was there. His heart pounded as he turned back to the front desk. Other Daniel was gone. The receptionist smiled at him pleasantly, as if he had been standing there the whole time. "Checking in?" she asked. Daniel backed away slowly, then turned and bolted toward the elevator. The doors were already open. As soon as he stepped inside, the air grew thick, pressing against his skin like invisible hands. He jabbed the button for his floor, his fingers trembling. The doors slid shut. The elevator shuddered. A slow, rasping breath sounded behind him. Daniel turned. The elevator mirror reflected the empty space behind him, but something was wrong. His reflection was not moving. Daniel lifted a trembling hand. His reflection did not. Then it smiled. Daniel slammed his fist against the emergency button. The lights flickered. The walls of the elevator trembled. A strange pressure built in his chest, a suffocating weight that made it hard to breathe. The reflection took a step closer. Then the elevator plummeted. The lights flickered wildly, the air rushing around him as the floor beneath him vibrated violently. Then silence. The elevator doors slid open. Daniel staggered forward. A cold draft wrapped around him like a dead thing. The hallway was dimly lit, the air stale and damp. A flickering bulb cast long, shifting shadows across the peeling wallpaper. A brass plaque on the wall caught his eye. It read, "Floor 13. Daniel's stomach dropped. The hotel did not have a 13th floor. He turned, expecting the elevator doors to still be open, but they had already closed behind him. A soft creak echoed down the hall. His pulse quickened. The hallway stretched impossibly long in both directions, doors lining either side. Each one bore a brass number plate, and at the very end of the corridor, one door was slightly ajar. "Room 1313. Something moved inside. A shadow shifting. Daniel's breath came out in short, sharp bursts. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, to find another way down. Then he heard it. A voice no louder than a whisper drifting from inside the room. You shouldn't have come back. Daniel's body locked up. His hands clenched into fists. Then, very slowly, the door creaked open wider. He stepped inside. The air inside room 1313 was thick with dust, the scent of mildew clinging to every surface. The furniture was identical to his own room, the same neatly made bed, the same heavy curtains, the same vintage dresser. But something was different. The walls were covered in photographs. Hundreds of them. Faces. All screaming. Some of the faces were blurred, others had their eyes scratched out, their mouths twisted in frozen terror. Daniel's gaze swept over the photographs, his chest tightening. Some of them looked old, black and white images of people dressed in clothes from the early 1900s. Others were in color, more recent. And then he saw it. A photo of himself, pinned right in the center. His throat went dry. Beneath each photograph, names were scratched into the wall. And beneath his name was already crossed out. His hands trembled as he took a step back. Then the whispers started again. Louder this time. Daniel spun around just as the closet door creaked open. Darkness yawned within. Something moved inside. Then a footstep. Not his own. His breath caught. At the end of the hallway, a figure stood. A man. Daniel's blood ran cold. It was him. Other Daniel. Smiling. Daniel's body locked up, his pulse hammering in his ears. Then the lights in the hallway began to flicker, one by one, moving toward him like an approaching storm. Other Daniel tilted his head. Then he ran. Daniel turned and sprinted in the opposite direction, his feet pounding against the carpet. Doors on either side of the hallway rattled violently as he passed, as if something inside them was trying to escape. A sharp, ice-cold breath skimmed his neck. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. Ahead, an open doorway. He lunged for it, throwing himself inside, and fell. Fell through endless darkness. Fell through nothing. Fell, then his eyes snapped open. He was outside, standing in front of the hotel. The neon sign flickered above him, casting eerie light across the sidewalk. Daniel's hands clenched at his sides. He had escaped. Hadn't he? His gaze lifted, drawn toward the 5th floor. One window was still illuminated. A figure stood in the window looking down at him. Daniel's breath hitched. It was him, his own reflection. But he wasn't smiling. He was grinning. Daniel turned and started walking toward the parking lot. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out. One new message. Room 1313 has been reserved for you. Welcome back. Daniel's pulse went still. His fingers tightened around the phone. Slowly, cautiously, he turned toward his car. The side mirror reflected the darkened street. His car. The empty sidewalk. The hotel behind him. But not him. Daniel had no reflection. He had never escaped. And deep inside the hotel, behind the doors of room 1313, something whispered. Laughing. Waiting. Chapter 4, the room that remembers. Daniel stood frozen, his fingers gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. The message on the screen burned into his mind. Room 1313 has been reserved for you. Welcome back. His breath came in shallow gasps. The night air pressed in around him, heavy and suffocating. The neon glow of the hotel sign flickered, casting eerie shadows across the sidewalk. He looked at his car again. His reflection was missing from the side mirror. His stomach twisted into a knot. He had never escaped. Somewhere deep inside the hotel, the thing that wore his face was still watching. Waiting. Laughing. Daniel clenched his jaw, forcing himself to move. He had to get away. His body felt sluggish, like he was walking through water, but he managed to reach his car and yank the door open. The interior was cold, too cold, as if it had been sitting in the dead of winter. He slid into the driver's seat and shoved the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, but the dashboard lights flickered strangely. A whisper from the back seat. His blood ran cold. Slowly, his hand trembling, he reached up to adjust the rearview mirror. A figure sat in the back seat, shrouded in shadow. Daniel couldn't breathe. His head tilted slightly, mimicking his movements. Then it smiled. Daniel slammed his foot on the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as the car lurched forward. His heart pounded as he sped down the empty street, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his fingers ached. He didn't dare look back. The road that led nowhere. Daniel drove for miles, refusing to slow down. The city should have been close by, but the road stretched endlessly ahead, swallowed by the night. The GPS screen glowed on the dashboard, But something was wrong. There was no route, no roads, just an empty black screen. His hands tightened around the wheel. A chill crept up his spine. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. The hotel, standing tall in the distance. His breath caught in his throat. That was impossible. He had been driving away from it for nearly an hour. A flicker of movement in the rearview mirror. He glanced up. The figure in the back seat was closer. His grin stretched wider. He swerved off the road. The car skidded to a stop, tires kicking up dust. Daniel's chest rose and fell in rapid gasps as he clutched the wheel, his body trembling. He forced himself to look in the mirror again. The back seat was empty, but the hotel was still there waiting for him, as if it had never left, as if he had never left. Daniel swallowed hard. He couldn't outrun it, so there was only one option left. He had to go back. The returned Daniel stepped out of the car, his legs unsteady beneath him. The cold air wrapped around him, thick with the scent of rain and something else, something metallic. The sidewalk leading up to the hotel looked the same, but something felt off. The entrance doors were already open, as if inviting him in, or expecting him. His stomach twisted, but he forced himself forward. Inside, the lobby was eerily silent. The warm glow of the chandeliers seemed dimmer now, the polished floors reflecting shadows that did not belong. The receptionist sat at the front desk, typing on her computer. She did not look up. Daniel approached cautiously. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She did not respond. His fingers curled into fists. "Excuse me," he repeated, louder this time. She slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were hollow. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. Then the lights flickered, and she was gone. The chair was empty. Daniel's breath came in short gasps. Then, from behind him, the elevator dinged. The doors slid open. The 13th floor calls again. The air inside the elevator was thick, pressing down on him like invisible hands. He stepped inside. The buttons on the panel flickered. The numbers shuffled, rearranging themselves in a pattern that made no sense. Then, one button illuminated on its own. Floor 13. A lump formed in Daniel's throat. He had no choice. He pressed the button. The doors slid shut. The elevator trembled, the walls seeming to pulse like a living thing. A whisper, so close to his ear it made his skin crawl. "Welcome home." Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. The elevator stopped. The doors opened. The hallway stretched before him, impossibly long, dimly lit by flickering bulbs. The walls seemed different now, as if they were breathing. A door at the end of the corridor was ajar. Room 1313. Daniel stepped out of the elevator. The doors closed behind him. A soft click. He was locked in. The room that remembers the air inside room 1313 was stale, thick with the scent of dust and something rotten. The bed was made, the curtains drawn, the furniture untouched. But the walls were covered in photographs. Hundreds of them. Faces. Screaming. Daniel's stomach churned. Some of the faces were faded, others fresh. Some had their eyes scratched out. And in the center, a photograph of himself. His own face frozen in terror. Beneath it, his name. And beside it, a new empty space waiting for the next. His hands trembled. The air grew heavier, pressing against his chest like a weight. Then the whispers started. Soft at first, then louder. The closet door creaked open. Daniel turned, his pulse hammering in his ears. Darkness yawned within, and something stepped out. A figure, tall, impossibly thin. A reflection of him, but wrong. His grin stretched too wide. It raised one hand, and beckoned him forward. The final choice. Daniel's mind screamed at him to run, but his body was frozen. The walls of the room shifted, the faces in the photographs turning toward him, their eyes wide with silent pleas. The figure took a step closer. Daniel's breath came in ragged gasps. He had to end this. He reached into his pocket, his fingers wrapping around the only thing he had left, his room key. The key to room 1313. He gripped it tightly. Then, in one swift motion, he turned and plunged it into the mirror. The glass shattered. A scream tore through the air, loud and inhuman, shaking the walls. The photographs burned, faces twisting and warping before dissolving into smoke. The figure recoiled, its reflection cracking apart. The room shuddered. Daniel ran. The hallway was collapsing behind him, the doors disappearing one by one. The elevator doors were open. He threw himself inside. The doors slammed shut. Silence. The air was still. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. Daniel stepped out. The hotel lobby was normal again. The receptionist sat at the desk, typing as if nothing had happened. The air smelled fresh. He turned. The elevator doors were already closed. And for the first time since he arrived, he saw his reflection. Did he truly escape? Daniel stepped outside. The night air was crisp, the city streets alive with people. A sense of relief flooded through him. He had made it. His phone vibrated. One new message. Your stay at the Blackwood Hotel has ended. Thank you for your visit. Daniel exhaled. Then the neon hotel sign flickered. A silhouette stood in the 5th floor window, watching him, smiling. And deep inside room 1313, something whispered, waiting for the next guest. Chapter 5. The whispers in the walls. Daniel stood outside the Blackwood Hotel, staring up at the flickering neon sign. The cold night air pressed against his skin, but the chill he felt came from something deeper, something unseen. He had escaped. Hadn't he? His phone was still in his hand. The message displayed on the screen. Your stay at the Blackwood Hotel has ended. Thank you for your visit. And yet, when he looked up, a figure stood in the window of the 5th floor, watching, smiling. Daniel clenched his jaw and forced himself to move. He walked toward his car, his heart hammering in his chest. He needed to get as far away from this place as possible. He needed to forget. The car door creaked as he opened it. He slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel, taking a deep breath. He turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. Then a whisper from the back seat. His entire body tensed. He didn't want to turn around, but he had to. Slowly, his gaze lifted to the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty, but the hotel was still there, reflected in the glass. And in one of the windows, a figure. His breath came in short, uneven gasps. He slammed the car into drive and sped off down the empty road, refusing to look back. The road that never ends. Daniel drove for miles. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the winding road ahead. He tried to steady his breathing, tried to convince himself that he was safe now. But something was wrong. He should have reached the highway by now. Instead, the road stretched endlessly before him, twisting and turning in impossible ways. His hands tightened around the wheel. His knuckles turned white. Then, a flicker of light in the distance. His heart skipped a beat. No, couldn't be. But as he drove closer, the truth became undeniable. The Blackwood Hotel stood ahead of him, exactly where it had been before, waiting. His chest tightened. He slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop. His pulse pounded in his ears. This was impossible. He had been driving in a straight line. He had left. Hadn't he? The hotel's doors were open, inviting. He could feel it pulling him back. A whisper curled through the air. You never left. Daniel's hands trembled. His entire body screamed at him to drive in the opposite direction. But deep down, he knew there was no escape. Not until he ended this. The return to Blackwood. Daniel stepped out of the car, his legs unsteady. The air was thick with silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The hotel loomed before him, dark and waiting. He swallowed hard and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the lobby was eerily still. The chandeliers cast dim light over the polished floor. The air smelled of old wood and something else. Something rotten. At the front desk, the receptionist sat motionless, typing into her computer. She did not acknowledge him. Daniel's gaze shifted toward the elevator. The doors were already open. A single button glowed on the panel. Floor 13. His stomach twisted. The hotel wanted him to return, and he had no choice. The 13th floor, the ride-up was silent. No whispers, no flickering lights, just the weight of the air pressing down on him. When the doors slid open, the hallway stretched before him. The walls seemed darker now, the wallpaper peeling away to reveal something beneath, something shifting. Daniel stepped out. The floor felt unstable beneath his feet, as if the hotel itself was breathing. A door stood ajar at the end of the hall. Room 1313. He swallowed the fear rising in his throat and walked toward it. Inside, the room was exactly as he had left it. The bed was neatly made. The air was stale. The walls. Daniel's breath caught. The photographs had changed. They were no longer frozen. They were moving. Mouths opened in silent screams. Eyes darted frantically, searching for an escape. And in the center of the wall, his own face. His reflection in the photograph blinked. And then it smiled. The door that shouldn't exist. Daniel stumbled back, his pulse hammering. He turned toward the exit and froze. A new door stood at the far end of the room. A door that had never been there before. It was old, made of dark wood, its surface covered in deep scratches. Something was on the other side. He could hear it, breathing, slow, heavy, waiting. A whisper slithered through the room. "Open it." Daniel's chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body disobeyed. He stepped forward. The door pulsed beneath his fingertips, like something alive. Then it swung open on its own. Darkness yawned beyond it, and something stepped through. The thing in the walls, it was tall, too tall. Its limbs were long and thin, its fingers ending in sharp, curved nails. Its face, no, it had no face. Just smooth, stretched skin where eyes and a mouth should have been. Yet somehow, Daniel knew it was smiling. The air grew thick. The walls trembled. The photographs whispered, their voices blending into a chorus of desperation. "Help us!" The creature took a step forward. Daniel could not move. His feet were rooted to the floor. The thing tilted its head. And then, for the first time, it spoke. "You belong to me now." The escape that never was. Daniel gasped as the pressure around him lifted. The room was gone. He was standing outside. The hotel loomed behind him, its neon sign flickering in the night. His hands trembled. Had it been real? A nightmare? Or had he truly escaped? His phone vibrated. One new message. "Your stay at the Blackwood Hotel has ended. Thank you for your visit." His heart pounded. Slowly, he turned toward his car. The side mirror reflected the dark street, the hotel, the empty sidewalk, but not him. He was missing. Daniel's blood turned to ice. The reflection in the mirror was still in the hotel, watching, smiling, and deep inside room 1313, something whispered, waiting for him to return. Chapter 6. The night that never ends. Daniel stood motionless, staring at the side mirror of his car. His reflection was missing. The hotel still loomed behind him, silent and waiting. His fingers trembled as he reached out, touching the cold surface of the car door. The air around him felt dense, pressing against his skin like unseen hands. His pulse pounded in his ears. He had escaped. Hadn't he? The vibration of his phone startled him. His breath hitched as he lifted the device. One new message. "Your stay at the Blackwood Hotel has ended. Thank you for your visit." A cold shiver ran down his spine. The same message, the same words. His mind screamed at him to leave, to drive as far away as possible. But something held him there, an invisible force keeping his feet planted on the pavement. The hotel wasn't done with him. He turned. The neon sign above the entrance flickered, casting long, shifting shadows across the empty parking lot. Daniel swallowed hard. If he had truly left, why did it still feel like he was inside? A slow, rhythmic tapping echoed from somewhere behind him. He whirled around, scanning the dark street. Nothing. Then the tap came again, from inside his car. His breath caught. His hand shook as he reached for the door handle, hesitating for a split second before pulling it open. The interior was empty. The back seat was bare. But something had changed. The rearview mirror was cracked. And written in the fogged-up glass, "Look behind you." A breath, cold and damp, ghosted against the back of his neck. Daniel turned, and the world shifted. The hotel that never lets go. His surroundings melted. The parking lot, the street, his car. Everything blurred and twisted, dissolving into darkness. When the world solidified again, he was inside. The Blackwood Hotel. Daniel staggered backward, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. The lobby was dimly lit, the chandeliers casting long, unnatural shadows. The receptionist sat at the desk, typing into her computer. She did not look up. Daniel clenched his fists. He had left. He had walked away. So why was he back? A whisper curled through the air, slithering along the walls. "Because you never left." The elevator dinged. Daniel turned slowly. The doors slid open. The panel inside flickered. Only one button was illuminated. Floor 13. His stomach twisted. He had no choice. His feet carried him forward before his mind could stop them. He stepped inside. The doors closed. The floor that watches the air inside the elevator was thick, pressing against his skin like something alive. Daniel clenched his fists, his body tense as the floor beneath him trembled. The numbers on the display flickered. Then the lights cut out. Darkness swallowed him. A low whisper filled the space. "You belong to us now." Daniel's breath hitched. His fingers scrambled for the elevator buttons, pressing them desperately. Nothing happened. The whisper grew louder. Then the doors opened. Daniel stepped onto floor 13. The hallway stretched before him, impossibly long, the walls lined with doors. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing something underneath. Not wood, not plaster, something breathing. His pulse pounded in his ears. At the end of the hall, one door was ajar. Room 1313. The whispers curled through the air, crawling beneath his skin. Daniel took a step forward. The hallway shifted. The walls seemed to pulse, as if something inside them was watching. He forced himself to move. One step, then another. The door creaked open wider. Inside, the room was dark. Waiting. Daniel swallowed hard and stepped in. The room that remembers the air inside room 1313 was thick with dust and something else. Something rotten. The walls were covered in photographs. Hundreds of them, all of them screaming. Daniel's breath caught. In the center of the wall, his own photograph had changed. His reflection was moving. It turned its head toward him, eyes wide, mouth opening in silent terror. Then it smiled. A whisper curled against his ear. "It's time." The closet door creaked. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. He turned, his entire body locked in fear. The darkness inside the closet stared back. And then something stepped out. A figure. His reflection. But its eyes black voids. Its mouth stretched into something unnatural. It raised a hand. And then it spoke. "Switch." The final choice. The room shuddered. The walls shifted. The photograph screamed. Daniel felt the pull, the force dragging him forward, toward the thing that wore his face. He fought against it, his hands clawing at the walls, but they melted under his touch. He was sinking, becoming part of the room, becoming part of the hotel. His reflection grinned wider. He stepped forward. Daniel was being erased. His body convulsed as the world twisted around him. The hotel was consuming him. No escape, no way out. Then the door appeared, a door that should not exist. A door made of dark wood, its surface covered in deep scratches. Daniel lunged for it, his fingers wrapped around the handle. His reflection screamed. The walls cracked, the whispers turned to shrieks, and then everything collapsed. Did he escape? Daniel's eyes snapped open. He was standing outside the hotel. The neon sign flickered above him. The cold air pressed against his skin. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. His phone buzzed. One new message. "Your stay at the Blackwood Hotel has ended. Thank you for your visit." Daniel exhaled sharply. He turned. His car was there. His reflection was in the side mirror. A rush of relief flooded through him. He had done it. He had escaped. Hadn't he? His pulse slowed. He reached for the car door. Then a whisper. Soft, almost playful. "See you again soon." Daniel froze. Slowly, he looked up. The fifth-floor window. A figure stood there, smiling. And deep inside room 1313, something whispered. Waiting. Chapter 7. The place that never lets go. Daniel sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The hotel was behind him, but its presence still pressed against him like a heavy weight. His phone sat on the dashboard, the message still glowing on the screen. "Your stay at the Blackwood Hotel has ended. Thank you for your visit." He had escaped. Hadn't he? A cold shiver ran down his spine. The thought slithered through his mind. Uninvited. What if he had never left? Daniel clenched his teeth. No, this was real. He was in his car. The cold leather under his hands, the rhythmic hum of the engine. It was real. Then why did the air feel wrong? Something was missing. His reflection. His breath caught in his throat. The side mirror reflected the empty street, the dark sky, the hotel's neon glow. But not him. His heart pounded, a steady hammering in his chest. Move, now. He shifted into drive. The road stretched ahead, dark and winding. He pressed the gas pedal, speeding forward, away from the hotel, away from whatever was lurking inside. Minutes passed, then an hour. But no matter how far he drove, the road never ended. The road that traps Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. The headlights cut through the darkness, but the road stretched endlessly ahead. He checked the GPS. A blank screen, no signal, no roads, just a black void. He swallowed hard, a slow dread curling in his stomach. Then a signpost, old, rusted. The words barely visible under layers of peeling paint. Blackwood Hotel. 1 mile ahead. Daniel's breath came in short gasps. His pulse pounded in his ears. This was impossible. He slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the pavement. The air inside the car turned thick, suffocating. His phone buzzed. One new message. Your stay at the Blackwood Hotel has ended. Thank you for your visit. Daniel's hands shook as he read the words. The exact same message. Over and over. His stomach twisted. The hotel had never let him leave. Tap on the window. Soft. Barely there. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Slowly, he turned his head. A figure stood outside the car. Tall. Motionless. His face was wrong. Smooth. Skin stretched unnaturally, where eyes and a mouth should have been. Yet somehow, Daniel knew it was watching him. The air inside the car grew heavy, thick with something unseen. Then, the figure lifted its hand and pointed behind him. The hotel returns. Daniel turned, his entire body rigid with terror. The Blackwood Hotel stood just behind his car, waiting. Its neon sign flickered, buzzing in the silence. The entrance doors stood open, welcoming him back. No, 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 no. His hands gripped the steering wheel. He had to fight it. The car doors unlocked. Click, click, click. Daniel's entire body locked up. The air inside turned frigid, the temperature plummeting in an instant. Then the back seat creaked. A whisper. You cannot leave. The staircase that descends. Daniel didn't remember getting out of the car. But he was inside, back in the lobby. The chandeliers flickered overhead. The air smelled of dust and something else. Something rotten. The receptionist sat at the desk, her hands still, unmoving. Daniel's breath was unsteady. Everything looked the same, except the elevator was gone. In its place, a staircase, leading downward. The air shifted, heavy and expectant. The walls trembled, as if the hotel itself was breathing. A whisper. It is time. Daniel couldn't move, not by choice. His feet carried him forward, like a puppet controlled by unseen strings. One step, then another. The stairs spiraled down, down, down into a black void. And the whispers followed, calling his name, welcoming him home. The basement that remembers the staircase ended. The space stretched before him, vast, endless. The walls were covered in names, carved into the wood. Hundreds, thousands, some fresh, others old, nearly erased by time. Daniel's stomach churned. His gaze fell to the bottom of the wall. His own name was there, carved into the wood. Deep scratches as if made by trembling hands. You were always meant to return. The whisper slithered against his ear. Daniel spun around. His breath caught. A figure stood before him. It had his face, but it wasn't him. It smiled, its lips stretching too wide. His voice came slow, deliberate. You know what you must do. Daniel's pulse pounded. Behind the figure, a door. Tall, dark, scratched. The forgotten door. A door he knew. A door he had seen before. The whispers rose. Daniel backed away. His heart slammed against his ribs. The figure tilted its head. You cannot escape, it whispered. Only trade places. Daniel froze, and suddenly it all made sense. The final choice. Daniel had never been the first. He had never escaped. Every visitor who came to the Blackwood Hotel thought they were leaving. But in the end, they always took someone else's place. His reflection was smiling now. Its eyes gleamed with something dark, something ancient. It's your turn. The walls trembled. The whispers screamed. The forgotten door swung open. A black abyss stretched beyond it. Daniel's pulse pounded. He had been running, fighting, desperate to leave. But there was no escape. There never had been. The only way out was through the door. His hands trembled. He reached for the handle. His reflection laughed. The whispers howled. The door swallowed him whole. Did he escape? Silence. The hotel stood still, waiting. The neon sign flickered. The door to room 1313 stood open. Inside, a man sat on the bed, breathing heavily. Daniel? No, not anymore. A new visitor would come soon, and the cycle would begin again. Chapter 7. The place that never lets Geo. Daniel sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The hotel was behind him, but its presence still pressed against him like a heavy weight. His phone sat on the dashboard, the message still glowing on the screen. Your stay at the Blackwood Hotel has ended. Thank you for your visit. He had escaped, hadn't he? A cold shiver ran down his spine. The thought slithered through his mind, uninvited. What if he had never left? Daniel clenched his teeth. No, this was real. He was in his car, the cold leather under his hands, the rhythmic hum of the engine. It was real. Then why did the air feel wrong? Something was missing. His reflection. His breath caught in his throat. The side mirror reflected the empty street, the dark sky, the hotel's neon glow. But not him. His heart pounded, a steady hammering in his chest. Move, now. He shifted into drive. The road stretched ahead, dark and winding. He pressed the gas pedal, speeding forward, away from the hotel, away from whatever was lurking inside. Minutes passed, then an hour. But no matter how far he drove, the road never ended. The road that traps Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. The headlights cut through the darkness, but the road stretched endlessly ahead. He checked the GPS. A blank screen, no signal, no roads, just a black void. He swallowed hard, a slow dread curling in his stomach. Then a signpost, old, rusted. The words barely visible under layers of peeling paint. Blackwood Hotel. 1 mile ahead. Daniel's breath came in short gasps. His pulse pounded in his ears. This was impossible. He slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the pavement. The air inside the car turned thick, suffocating. His phone buzzed. One new message. Your stay at the Blackwood Hotel has ended. Thank you for your visit. Daniel's hands shook as he read the words. The exact same message. Over and over. His stomach twisted. The hotel had never let him leave. Tap on the window. Soft. Barely there. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Slowly, he turned his head. A figure stood outside the car. Tall. Motionless. His face was wrong. Smooth. Skin stretched unnaturally, where eyes and a mouth should have been. Yet somehow, Daniel knew it was watching him. The air inside the car grew heavy, thick with something unseen. Then, the figure lifted its hand and pointed behind him. The hotel returns. Daniel turned, his entire body rigid with terror. The Blackwood Hotel stood just behind his car, waiting. Its neon sign flickered, buzzing in the silence. The entrance doors stood open, welcoming him back. No, 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 no. His hands gripped the steering wheel. He had to fight it. The car doors unlocked. Click, click, click. Daniel's entire body locked up. The air inside turned frigid, the temperature plummeting in an instant. Then the backseat creaked. A whisper. You cannot leave. The staircase that descends. Daniel didn't remember getting out of the car. But he was inside, back in the lobby. The chandeliers flickered overhead. The air smelled of dust and something else. Something rotten. The receptionist sat at the desk, her hands still, unmoving. Daniel's breath was unsteady. Everything looked the same, except the elevator was gone. In its place, a staircase, leading downward. The air shifted, heavy and expectant. The walls trembled, as if the hotel itself was breathing. A whisper. It is time. Daniel couldn't move, not by choice. His feet carried him forward, like a puppet controlled by unseen strings. One step, then another. The stairs spiraled down, down, down into a black void. And the whispers followed, calling his name, welcoming him home. The basement that remembers the staircase ended. The space stretched before him, vast, endless. The walls were covered in names, carved into the wood. Hundreds, thousands, some fresh, others old, nearly erased by time. Daniel's stomach churned. His gaze fell to the bottom of the wall. His own name was there, carved into the wood. Deep scratches as if made by trembling hands. You were always meant to return. The whisper slithered against his ear. Daniel spun around. His breath caught. A figure stood before him. It had his face, but it wasn't him. It smiled, its lips stretching too wide. His voice came slow, deliberate. You know what you must do. Daniel's pulse pounded. Behind the figure, a door. Tall, dark, scratched. The forgotten door. A door he knew. A door he had seen before. The whispers rose. Daniel backed away. His heart slammed against his ribs. The figure tilted its head. "You cannot escape," it whispered. "Only trade places." Daniel froze, and suddenly it all made sense. The final choice Daniel had never been the first. He had never escaped. Every visitor who came to the Blackwood Hotel thought they were leaving. But in the end, they always took someone else's place. His reflection was smiling now. Its eyes gleamed with something dark, something ancient. "It's your turn." The walls trembled. The whispers screamed. The forgotten door swung open. A black abyss stretched beyond it. Daniel's pulse pounded. He had been running, fighting, desperate to leave. But there was no escape. There never had been. The only way out was through the door. His hands trembled. He reached for the handle. His reflection laughed. The whispers howled. The door swallowed him whole. Did he escape? Silence. The hotel stood still, waiting. The neon sign flickered. The door to room 1313 stood open. Inside, a man sat on the bed, breathing heavily. Daniel? No, not anymore. A new visitor would come soon, and the cycle would begin again.